that leads us into our film discussion segment. So for those listening in the first time, how this works is I used to have a YouTube show where I would recommend a bunch of movies to people, uh, and it would get flagged by copyright all the time because I would show clips of the movies, and I didn't want to deal with that. So, and I also just hated the sound of my own voice, rigidly like reading off this like really poorly written script I would put together for each movie. So but I still wanted to do film discussion, so that's how this podcast works, is that I recommend the guest a movie, the guest recommends me a movie, and then we discuss what those movies were. So, kind of going back to some of the points we were making earlier about, like, Lovecraftian horror, the movie I recommended, Couper, was a movie we had both been excited to see for a while. It's one of the rare cases so far in this show where I had not seen the movie prior to recommending it. It was Richard Stanley's Color Out of Space adaptation starring Nick Cage. But I guess here, like, because we've talked about this before, but for those listening who aren't really familiar with your whole stance on Lovecraft and his adaptations and all that, just what do you think how do you think his source material has kind of been treated in film form? For those who haven't heard your points before.
Well, it's kind of like a multi-layered issue for me. Like, for one, when people say Lovecraftian, when they, at least for me, for what I see, they don't really get the point of Lovecraft's stories. It's never been about the monsters. Like, if you read the short story Call of Cthulhu, Cthulhu's in there for, like, a couple pages. It's all about the existential horror of, these things. They're older than, like, fucking time itself. They don't care. They're apathetic. They don't care about how their power affects the world or anything that happens.
Yeah.
It's just that you are a small, insignificant speck. It's that form of horror. But he also does have some good slow burn, some good, and some good, psychological horror elements that I'm not sure if this is, like, real or if it's all made up or if it's something in between.
Yeah.
I mean, not all of his works are, a 10 out of 10. Mm-hmm. There are some that are better than others.
What would you say are, like, his top 3, like, best stories overall?
I'm gonna sound like one of those people, but probably Call of Cthulhu, At the Mountains of Madness.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if I can pick between either not Color Out of Space, Shadow Out of Time, Rats in the Wall, or The Dunwich Horror.
Those are some good selections. I've only read, like, the main, like the ones that everyone's like, oh man, like, if you're gonna read Lovecraft, you gotta read Dunwich Horror, Call of Cthulhu, Color Out of Space, and then At the Mountains of Madness. Those are, like, the main ones that I've read.
Not to we aren't sponsored, at least I don't think we are.
No.
But Amazon has a fantastic Amazon has a couple Lovecraft stories or Lovecraft audiobooks, and they're, like, 60 hours long. So,
right.
Like, you're getting your money for what you pay.
Now, does he? Because I know you're way more familiar with him. Has he only written short stories, or does he have, like, full novels as well?
No, the most he ever wrote was like a novella. He wrote short stories, novellas, and novelettes.
Gotcha.
Unfortunately, he didn't really write anything too long.
I'm the kind of a weird tangent. I got this image in my head because you were like, it's unfortunate he never did a novel, because that is true. He kind of like he was never really successful in life, and then he was kind of like one of those cases where he wrote a lot and then he died, and then later everyone was like, oh man, Lovecraft is so good. But I was thinking, like, what if in like some alternate universe you have that episode of Doctor Who where they bring back Vincent Van Gogh to, like, the present day to, like, show him, like the Louvre or like whatever, and like he sees all his like paintings up on the wall, and everyone's talking about how great Van Gogh is. Like, what if there was like a similar thing where it's like they're at a horror convention, and yet all these people like dressed up as like Cthulhu and like Lovecraft nuts and all that, and he's looking at all of it, and like it's meant to be this like a heartfelt thing, but you got all this like awful imagery around it.
Yeah, and he's like, and for those of you who don't know, Lovecraft was a rampant racist.
Yeah.
You could just see someone and be like, what the?
Exactly. It's like, those people are allowed outside these days? Like, oh my god.
Country's
Yeah.
gone to hell.
It's such a love, like, it's such like a, oh man, he was a brilliant writer, but like, oh yeah, it's a shame that he like, grew up in the 20s.
Yeah, he was like a massive racist, but I don't think that really detracts.
No, I think
at least in my mind, if you put it in like, yes, that was at the time, the 1920s had rampant racism,
right?
And it was it wrong? Yeah, of course it was.
Yeah,
but I believe he's still a good writer. He's very influential in American horror.
Mm-hmm.
Probably one of the first, besides Richard Chambers and Edgar Allan Poe. I can't believe I almost forgot his name.
He's also like,
just go commit toaster bath for that.
That I wouldn't go that far, but yeah, no, he was a huge name, and I mean, written a bunch of stuff. Like you said, primarily the Call of Cthulhu is what people kind of most remember him for. That's kind of what influences like a lot of like the modern stuff about him. He's had like, because one other thing that you and I have talked about a lot is that he's had a lot of adaptations. Yeah, he's one of those, because a lot of the stuff that or at least some of the major stuff that he's written, like Call of Cthulhu specifically, is within public domain. So anyone can make anything they want out of like some like Call of Cthulhu. I'm not sure if Color Out of Space is in the public domain, but a lot of his stuff is. So
all of his works are in public domain.
All of it. Oh man, I gotta go make a Color Out of Space movie then. But yeah, no,
Speaking of which, have you quick side tangent that you can cut this out if you want, but
okay.
Have you seen the I watched it, Ian actually showed me, our friend Ian. Mm-hmm. He showed us, or at least me, this SCP-096 little short film. And
I haven't seen that.
It just reminded me of some of the, like, that's another great one, is that kind of like public domain. It's kind of a mix of public domain and just influences. Like, you can tell where the influences are in the whole SCP fandom.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, the public domain of it is very interesting.
Yeah. I'd say the SCPs especially is another thing that he kind of has had a big influence over. Like a lot of stuff out of that is like directly stuff that he would have written about.
Yeah, you can tell a lot of where the influence come from, and some of it. I mean, I'm not well versed in all of them,
mm-hmm.
but I'm sure there are a couple that they're like a direct love letter to some of his works and his ideas. Like, don't get me wrong, Lovecraft has a very specific style of writing, and if you don't like that style of writing, you aren't gonna like his stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the time he'll overuse the word thing.
Yeah.
Or like indescribable. He'll describe something as like an indescribable monstrosity of tentacles and whatever other strange stuff he adds.
Yeah.
But the ideas behind it, I think, are some of the more better things he can do.
Especially for that time too, because like that was the pinnacle of like the Universal monster movies, and like everything's very concrete, and it's like you said, a lot of the stuff that he wrote about was like intangible things that you couldn't really put into like a neat little category. So I think that's kind of why his work works so well today versus back then, is because we're more open to the idea of like something being indescribable, or like an existential horror rather than like a monster that can physically chase you down.
Yeah. Yeah.
So speaking of intangible beings, the let's get to the actual movie I recommended, Color Out of Space, and we'll avoid spoilers at first, but we'll get into it in a once we talk about it kind of on the surface level. So what did you think of this adaptation?
It's got Tommy Chong and Nick Cage. What's not to like?
Exactly. Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting. The perspective shift of the narrator was interesting because in the original short story, the person who's surveying the area because they're going to fill up the area for a reservoir is never described. He's a nameless narrator, kind of like with Herbert West, the narrator of Herbert West. A lot of his stories are never described. You can just assume by the way by how he writes his stuff. They're probably a white, kind of how he saw himself, a white dude.
Right.
And all right, fine. And I don't mind the perspective shift of and he was a nameless narrator. They did give him a name. Let me look it up real quick.
In the movie, it was Ward Phillips,
Ward Phillips,
which is kind of a nice little homage too, because Howard Phillips Lovecraft, and then you got Ward Phillips as the hydrologist guy. That's a nice little nod. He also wears a I don't know if you noticed, but he wears a Miskatonic University T-shirt throughout a lot of the movie.
I saw that, and I'm like, I mean, of course you can't go to Massachusetts where the story is set and not bring up Miskatonic.
Yeah.
Or Arkham, or a lot of the stuff he added, Dunwich, Innsmouth. And it is very interesting. They did change the names of the characters to be a little bit more with the times, I assume. Easier to say.
Well, isn't Lavinia a character in the Dunwich Horror?
Yes.
Okay.
Lavinia Waitley gives birth to the Dunwich Horror, essentially. Either way, I did like that little nod to... and Maybelline Arthur was fantastic as Lavinia. All the actors were very... With the exception of, I would say, the younger kid, but that's just because child actor, unfortunately.
Yeah.
He did the best he could. It's just some spots you're like, that could have been done better.
He is also has I don't want to spoil it just yet, but he has a very unique 10 or 15 minute sequence in the movie where he has to do some really kind of messed up performance with his mom, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's not that's not terribly focused on him, but for a little kid to have to perform something like that is kind of I don't know, as a testament to his ability to not get traumatized, I guess, on film. I
am looking up the movie right now, and I'm seeing the ratings. All I have to say is RobertEbert.com gave it a 3.5. Rotten Tomatoes, it's 86%. IMDb is 66.2%.
Yeah, I think because they average everything out, so I think you can unless you get a whole bunch of high numbers, you're not really going to get a high score. I think the highest rated movie on IMDb is a 9.2, I think. Yeah, well,
the other thing is the Google users review is about 80%, so I would give it probably an 80% overall. 80% satisfaction. But I did like how they changed all, Nick Cage's character, Nathan Gardner, is supposed to be Nahum. The person telling, relaying the story to the water guy, the surveyor, is Ami Pierce, who is the sheriff.
Yeah.
Either way, it was all very good. For the most, I would give it an 80%. There were some things they changed that I personally didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
but it was very good.
I'm a little bit more critical of it. I'm probably giving it like a 7, maybe. Like I really liked it a lot at first, and I kind of rewatched some stuff, and I was like, okay, that's not. I don't know how I feel about that. But then I kind of went back to really appreciating it. Like I think purely from a subjective stance, it's a good movie. A lot of the things that bothered me are kind of like you'd have to like really be like nitpicking, I think, to um like be actually upset with it, like you said, like the little kid's performance, the fact that it's almost a shame because there's a movie that came out in 2018 called Annihilation that is kind of a similar concept that I not really in the sense of like it being like a tangible like or however
It's a
tangible how you
force.
can get.
It's a force represented by a specific
Yeah.
spectrum or color that changes the area around it.
Right, and I kind of if you're asking me which one I'd rather put on and watch, I'd pick Annihilation, just because I think that's like the better uh, overall made movie. But that's not to say that I don't like that. Like this one, obviously, like if you want some crazy Nick Cage moments, you got to watch Color Out of Space. If you want to laugh at Tommy Chong for 2 scenes and then also be like really creeped out by him for another scene, then then that you should go with this one. If you want to have some like, I mean, Annihilation has some like really disturbing imagery, but if you want some like really disturbing imagery, go with The Color Out of Space. That was the other thing I was going to mention too, is that I didn't realize, and I should have seen this coming because it is, like you said, in the public domain, but there's like already like 5 or 6 different adaptations of The Color Out of Space in one way or another.
Yeah, I would say this one is the best adaptation so far.
Yeah.
Just as The Reanimator with Jeffrey Combs.
Oh, yeah. He's good.
Jeffrey Combs is just absolutely fantastic in everything he does. From this to Star Trek to everything else he was in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree.
But with the movie, like the setup's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that happens, I liked my favorite part. So Lovecraft describes this color as, something like that's like not in the realm of our universe.
Mm-hmm.
It's extra universal, if I can use that term. It's a color you can't even describe.
Yeah.
Now, the way they implemented that was very interesting. They used a very bright, pinkish hue, and it feels very unnatural.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see that specific, or at least I don't. I don't see that specific hue in nature.
Yeah.
It looks alien. It looks, wrong almost.
The one thing they did specifically, because I listened to an interview with the director, like going off what you were talking about, the color is specifically, he said it's a very specific shade of magenta, and the reason why they picked that is because I could be horribly misquoting this, but he said that something like magenta doesn't exist naturally on the visible color spectrum. It's a byproduct of our brains trying to process red and blue at the same time. So technically magenta is an otherworldly color that doesn't exist, and that's why they went with that, which I thought was a really
that
interesting choice.
That is very nice.
Mm-hmm. You can tell how much of a fan he is of the source material.
It's like his source material has a lot of has a lot of promise. Like if you made like an updated Color Out of Space or Reanimator and made it a little bit more serious, it could be a pretty good movie. Like yeah, it's still going to be campy with the reanimated bodies.
Yeah,
but it could just be like a different form of a Frankenstein telling, because that's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
Someone who creates, is obsessed with science and tries to create life for other reasons than why Dr. Victor Frankenstein did.
Mm-hmm.
But it is very, I mean, you could do it where they could be like childhood friends and they go through the story. Like, I'm not going to spoil anything in that story, but,
yeah.
They could be childhood friends. They could meet in college like they did in the story. hell, it could be you could change the main character who is assumed to be a man, but it's never explicitly stated to a woman, and the reason why she stays with him, I don't know, she's in love with him.
Right. Yeah.
Could be kind of that weird kind of like, I'm in love with him, yet I'm also scared of him.
And then that's also kind of like that almost exact theme is also kind of in Color Out of Space a little bit between like the hydrologist and Lavinia. Like there's this weird kind of romantic, kind of caring relationship that's almost going on but not quite, which was one thing I didn't really like about it. They never full on go there, which I was happy with. Like there's never a moment where it's like, I can't let you go, I love you. But it is definitely hinted and teased at throughout the movie.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Which I thought was one of the weaker aspects. But it was a very enjoyable. So I guess, do we want to use this to get into spoilers then? Because there's a lot to say. I feel like
spoilers.
Yeah. So spoilers.
If you don't want spoilers, skip until whenever we're done.
Yeah. No. I always just say just pause the podcast right here. Go watch the movie, then come back. I'm pretty sure it's available on most platforms to stream. It's
available on Amazon for like $4 if you want to rent it.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Yeah, I watched it on YouTube.
I bought it for like $14.
As in, like, you bought a physical one, or you bought like the digital copy off? Oh, okay. Yeah, I watched it on
a physical and a digital for like $14.
Yeah. I watched it on YouTube. You can rent it for like $3, I think, and you get it for like 2 days. That's if you're not sure yet. But I think if you're a hardcore horror fan, and definitely if you're a Lovecraft fan, it's like we keep on saying, this is probably the best straight adaptation we've had of his source material.
Guillermo del Toro makes At the Mountains of Madness finally, it's going to be one of the best we're going to get.
Which, speaking of which, I don't know if you heard this, but the guy who made this, he said that this is the first in a trilogy that he's planning of Lovecraft adaptations that are that are loosely connected with each other. He said the next one he's going to do is the Dunwich Horror.
The Dunwich Horror will be fantastic because they even referenced Dunwich twice.
Yeah, in like the news report. I think they
news report.
They hit like all of the major cities in that news report. They're like, and that's the weather in Arkham today, and up and over in Dunwich, Innsmouth, and like we got more of the same. Like
Bradbury, Innsmouth.
Yeah, they go like right down the line.
Yeah, and it's a nice little nod to that. If they're gonna do in that little area, Dunwich, Innsmouth, and this one, Dunwich and Innsmouth, are perfectly in Arkham.
Mm-hmm.
They're around Arkham. Innsmouth is supposed to be on the coast.
Yeah. And
Dunwich, Arkham, and the other one are all Aylesbury. I'm sorry, it's Aylesbury.
Right. Actually, here, sorry, I kind of messed up. I don't know if I'll go back and edit this in at the beginning of our conversation, but we didn't summarize the movie. So, Color Out of Space is basically, you got this family living in the woods. You got Nicolas Cage as the dad. You got his wife, their teenage daughter, teenage son, and then like maybe like an 8-year-old son. They're living out in the woods, and this meteor comes down, and over the course of a few days, it starts to alter the environment around them and like bend time and space and do all this weird stuff. And it obviously progressively gets worse as the movie goes on. So that's Color Out of Space. If you want a good pitch for what this movie is about. But then so spoilers. I don't even know where to begin. Like what would you say is the best scene in the movie? Because I can tell you which one I think is definitely the most memorable sequence, but what do you think is like overall best scene out of the whole movie? Or actually, let's phrase it like this: when for you, when you were watching this movie, did you go, okay, yeah, this is the best Lovecraft adaptation?
Probably when they first getting to know the gardeners up until the point where the meteor hits, and that whole like segment.
Yeah.
Like the whole at the beginning when Lavinia's doing witchcraft was interesting and a nice callback because Arkham is also referred to as witch haunted Arkham.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of like tales and whatnot. There's a lot of witchcraft that goes on in Lovecraft stories.
Yeah.
So like that was a nice little nod. Like all of it is it's a love letter to Lovecraft, and I adore that.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, there are some issues.
What are some of your issues with it?
My biggest one is the ending, not because of how it ended, but because of how abrupt it felt.
Okay. I can see that.
For certain aspects of it, like, yes, like I knew everyone was going to die. I liked how it felt like Lavinia and her brother might make it out.
Mm-hmm.
I should say Lavinia and Benny.
Yeah.
Might make it out. I found that, like, kind of tugging on your heartstrings a bit. Of course, Ward Phillips is going to survive if you've read the story.
Yeah.
The way they killed off the sheriff just felt like it came out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes, the trees kind of move. That's one thing they never did show properly, is the trees moving on their own.
Yeah.
And a few of the stranger aspects of the meteors,
would you say that because again, like you're someone who knows the source material inside and out, is the way, I mean, like you said, obviously Lovecraft has the problem where he just kind of describes things as indescribable. But do you think that the color was well represented in this movie, or do you think they kind of like toned it down to make it more like understandable for people who don't know Lovecraft that well?
Even though they did tone down some aspects, like, I found the fact that it spat out a praying mantis was a little weird. Like, that came out of nowhere, and I was like, what the fuck?
I kind of took that as like maybe there was like like bug eggs in there anyway, and it just mutated them like it did with like the tomatoes.
Yeah, that could be it. It just felt like it was a little weird.
Although, yeah, the creature, I mean, like that was one thing that it kind of bothered me, is there's some great practical effects, but when like almost all of
the practical effects, fantastic.
Yeah, almost all of the CGI though, like that bug was terrible. The bug, the Tommy Chong's cat for like the split second that you see it after it changes, like,
yeah,
those were really, really bad. But it just goes to show like the value of like practicals, but also if you're gonna do CGI, having it in like a darker environment aids your
suspension of disbelief.
Aids the suspension of disbelief much better, because all of the scenes at night where they show like really graphic, intense things, it looked great, but like that scene with the bug, kind of the scene with the cat, when you have harsh light on it, it's just like, okay, that's a cartoon. But like
or when the tree kills Ami Pierce, yeah, that was a bit weird.
Yeah, like when all the stuff at night was amazing, and it looked beautiful. It was enthralling. The nighttime scenes especially were my favorite in the whole movie.
The nighttime scenes were very well done.
It's almost like a Blair Witch thing, where it's like everything is like kind of quiet and kind of normal in the day, but like, when nighttime comes around, some fucked up things are gonna happen, and I really enjoyed looking forward to those scenes, especially the last night when shit really hits the fan. Yeah.
Another thing that doesn't bother me but was left out was when the meteor hits, scientists come and they take pieces of the meteorite.
Yeah.
Now, the meteorite was described as being like plastic consistency. Like they could literally like dig gouges out of it with a rock hammer and they didn't have to break it.
Right.
It was very soft plastic.
Yeah.
And I think that was interesting, so they didn't like add another like plot thread of like scientists being like, what the fuck is this?
Mm-hmm.
In the center of the meteor is like essentially like a glass orb or like a bead or whatever.
Yeah.
That was the same color as the entity.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me.
No, really quick aside. We can get back to this point, but I just wanted to ask, because again, way better than I do. Is the color an entity in the way that Cthulhu is an entity, or is it just like an aside character that isn't like
It's just kind of a random entity. Like
okay,
the universe is large. It's not an old one. It's not any of the established creatures in Lovecraft mythology. It's not Migo. It's not any of that.
okay,
Oh, quick side note as well. Not Haunter of the Dark. The Whisperer in Darkness would also be a good one to do.
yeah,
But that one requires a lot of CGI.
yeah,
And it would be a lot better at night, so it could work.
okay,
You can hide the creature for a long time and just have it be like implied for what he's doing.
right.
Anyway, back to the
But yeah, you were saying about how like the orb and the meteorite and all that.
yeah, they break open the orb, they're like, oh, that was weird, and then the lightning strikes and destroys the meteor. And I won't get into it, but there's a lot of like some science bits with like how the meteor reacts to certain like acids and how it reacts to metals and glass and whatnot and silicones.
Yeah,
But speeding that up and condensing it to just it lands, the media's like, oh, what's this? That's weird, and then it just gets lightning striked into oblivion was interesting, and it did kind of help the plot progression. And they did, I would say that's one of the biggest issues with the movie, is it speeds up both biggest issue and biggest it's both a help and a hindrance for the movie, because it does speed up how everything happens, because the I believe it's a novella is quite a slow burn.
yeah,
A lot of his stories are. But especially the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadeth. Hoo boy, and At the Mountains of Madness. Those are two long ones. But the way that it just kind of like slowly started to like change certain things and then absorb creatures and mutate and twist them.
Yeah.
Was interesting. I was happy they added in the last line of Ami Pierce in it's a full paragraph when he's talking to Nahum Gardner is talking to Ami when he finally comes. But the one I liked was where he's talking about the color because they had just like almost killed him, and he's talking about how it sucks and burns. It comes from some place that ain't here.
Yeah.
And
they kind of give all that dialogue to Tommy Chong in the last scene that we see him in.
Yeah, it gives it to Ezra. But the thing I liked about like that, it was like, yeah, it works. Did I want that to happen to Nathan? Yeah. Nathan? Yeah. I would have thought that would have been a more faithful adaptation, but it's not. They didn't do it in a bad way.
Yeah. And
faithful
that scene
is not always practical.
Right. And especially that scene with Tommy Chong, like if I could play, if someone was like, oh, why should I see this movie? If I was given the chance to play a single scene for them, I would play that scene with the final scene where they go see Tommy Chong and he has like that tape player and his like, you just have his like disembodied like warped voice like describing what the color is. Like that's such a great effective like just creepy scene, and I loved it.
It was a very good scene. I did enjoy it quite a bit.
Yeah.
Again, the ending was very. It both felt rushed and planned out. It's weird.
Well, I think it definitely is planned out because it is kind of like in the way that they shoot it and in the dialogue and like the little tiny hint that they drop at in the last shot is it's implied that like even though the entity is gone, this isn't over. Like the sky is still like that weird magenta color, and he says like he's like as long as I'm here,
I'm not going to drink the water.
I'll never drink the water. Yeah. And not only that, but like the mayor character even says a few points where it's like we're providing water for like the whole this part of the East Coast, and you're like, oh no,
yeah,
like
pretty much the entirety of New England. And I'm just like, well. I ain't going to New England.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm happy to drink my dirty New Jersey tap water.
And then like they bring back the bug again for like 2 seconds. It is kind of implied like, hey, even though the entity left, like you're still going to be dealing with the residual effects, and this is probably going to be a much larger scale thing, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. Which I kind of like that, but I do see what you mean. Excuse me. Where it could have been done a little bit better.
The ending of the novella, essentially what happens is Ami goes to see Nahum. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to call him Nathan from now because it's a lot easier. Because it is the way he writes this family, it's very rural, it's very like, I don't want to say country bumpkin, but it's very, that rural speech you only get from like old time like farmers.
Yeah.
How they were portrayed back in the day, their own specific kind of form of dialect.
Right.
Kind of like American Cockney, if you will, but for different reasons. For why it was kind of developed. Anyway, so Ami goes to see Nathan. He's lying on his bed like gray because the color sucks all life and color out of you, and you just kind of turn into gray, flaking ash.
Mm-hmm.
He goes to see his wife. The wife is like dead, kind of.
Yeah.
And it's implied she's like mutated, but still some semblance of life is there, or was there. It's an interesting way he describes it.
Yeah.
But
which is kind of reflected well in the movie too.
Yeah. Ami sees Nathan, hears the sucking sound of the color, and then as soon as he hears it splash down in the well, which is weird because it's supposed to be a color, but it does still have a tangible presence to it.
Yeah.
Which makes it all the more alien when you try and think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Sees that Nathan is finally dead and turning into actual ash and like disintegrating. Gets cops. They come back to, he comes back to essentially say, hey, this family is dead.
Yeah.
And while that happens, night falls. And the color kills Ami's horse, actually. I know this is not really integral to the story.
Mm-hmm.
But the way he describes the horse like screaming and like trying to frantically get away is like, it's a little spine chilling.
Yeah.
Or at least for me it is. I don't know about.
And thankfully they spare the horse in the movie.
Yeah, it just runs off. It's like, later, bitch.
Nope, fuck
I'm out of here.
Yeah. Which actually...
The horse had the most sense out of everyone in that family.
Well, they keep on trying to leave, and it's just like their circumstances just keep on fucking them over. But actually, that was one thing that I... mix
between circumstance and the color kind of fucking with their head.
Yeah, because that is one thing that I didn't really pick up on too much in the movie the first time I saw it, but then when I was watching clips of it, it made a bit more sense because not only does it mess with the physical environment and like the animals and all that, but it also screws with the characters' heads, which I mean that's kind of overt with like the mood swings that a lot of the characters go through and like some of the ways that they act in the beginning of the movie. Yeah, he literally the director told him like, hey, I want you to channel some Vampire's Kiss in your performance for this movie, and I think he definitely he brings some of that back. But what I was saying was the movie also does some interesting bits of dialogue where they play with time a little bit, where one character will be like, I'll be back in the morning, and then like Tommy Chong will be like, what do you mean it's already morning? And then like it's a different time than when the guy showed up, or I don't know. It just I forget the point I was even trying to make, but they do a good job of kind of like psychologically messing with you, as well as like actually messing with you by showing you like weird, disturbing visuals.
Yes. Anyway, back to the story. I know we got a little derailed.
Yeah. No.
So, the Ami and the policeman are in the house when the color kind of shoots back into space.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when while it's happening, you know, like kind of the way it was described, it reminds me of quite a few movies. The best one I can think of is in Lord of the Rings when they're trying to get into Mordor, and the light shoots up from the Witch King's palace.
Yeah.
And it just has like that noise and just kind of like that blast of air. So they all like get the fuck out of the house because they're smart and they haven't been affected as much. And the house gets destroyed and gets named the Blasted Heath because it's just like pretty much just the fireplace left and just shattered timbers. But Ami watches as the color goes up and there's a small bit that wasn't able to leave.
Yeah.
So it's still there. And it's still absorbing and feeding on things when the reservoir comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't think it could transfer through all the water and get all of Arkham citizens. It's far more localized.
Yeah.
But the way they did it in the movie was very good.
Yeah. I think I said earlier with like the way that they kind of hint at like I'll never, where he says I'll never drink the water, and like throughout the whole movie he's kind of like he's very conscious of like, oh, don't drink that's dirty, or like we have to test this water, and then at the very end he just straight up like flicks his cigarette into the reservoir. It's kind of like a nice little nod to like how dangerous it is, and like the way that they show like the sky is kind of like changed a little bit, and there's like the bugs still coming around and all that. Like that was a good way to communicate that point. The whole bit of where he comes back and like the color starts to come up from the well, and like you get this like visual representation of what the world it came from looks like. And when he like tries to leave and like space and time is like bending around him and like preventing him from leaving, and like that was really, really well done. We keep on saying, and it's just like a lot of things that a lot of themes that Lovecraft has in his stories. They did a very good job of taking things that aren't really tangible and just kind of like abstract thoughts and communicating them in a very good visual way that is clear to understand and very effective, I feel like.
Yes, I would agree. Now, so continuing with spoiler territory, I know we're jumping around in the plot, but
yeah, no, it's whatever.
So the meteor lands, hits, and then essentially it gets lightning striked into oblivion.
Yeah.
And that's when the weird stuff starts to happen. Fruits and vegetables start to come in bigger than they ever have, but they have like a bitterness, like a subtle bitterness has crept in and ruins the crop.
Yeah.
And that's when we get one of the first good Nick Cage freakout scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Is he's just yelling about these fucking tomatoes, as he put it.
Yeah.
And it's great. It's great. And you can start to see the madness kind of creep in.
Mm-hmm.
Of like the whole family.
Right.
You know, it's shown very well, the madness seeping in. I adore it. And slowly but surely, like, the dog goes missing. The llamas are left out when their dad told them to put them away because they're affected by this creature, this thing, this entity. It's messing with both them and time and space, like we said.
Yeah.
And then, right in the last third, things start to get, like, really real. Like, the color comes out, and it just it thingifies the llamas.
Yeah, basically. Almost straight up John Carpenter
Yeah, the dogs.
Dog cage territory.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I fucking hate that scene. I hate it when I see I hate it when I see specifically dogs die. Cats, they can fucking die in movies all they want. Not the dogs. Not the goodest of boys. But, and then they go out. Nick Cage puts down the llamas in his Nick Cage way with a double barrel.
Yeah.
And
screaming
then,
and covered in blood the whole time.
That's exactly how I want to go out. Screaming and covered in blood. That ain't mine. But Then the mother goes after Jack, the youngest
Yeah,
son.
that was I kind of, it's like you said, I knew that like everyone was gonna die, or like I at least had this creeping suspicion that everyone was gonna die. But when that happens, like I wasn't mentally ready for that. That was one of
Yeah,
the most fucked up things I've seen in a movie in a while.
yeah. So they essentially, um,
They also get
oof,
thingified.
yeah, they fail a system shock roll after teleporting. If I can use that for all my second
Yeah.
edition D&D fans out there, but essentially they get fused together,
Yeah.
and it's horrid and disgusting and beautiful. The practical effects are amazing. You just you see the color kind of pulsing through them a little bit, and you can still hear the mother and the son
Like
distinctly,
moaning and
crying
crying
out
and
and
yeah.
moaning, it hurts, it hurts. And like you can feel the characters like apprehension to put these things down, put this thing down.
Yeah.
And then that's when things start to really pick up.
Mm-hmm.
Lavinia and Benny try to escape. They can't. They go
Mm-hmm.
back inside. I think the horse ran off
Yeah, horse runs
at that
off.
point.
And
They
that
go back
that was one of
inside.
my biggest no because they talk about escaping earlier, and then the fusion happens, and then they're like, okay, no, now we got to do it for real. And like that was one of my biggest problems in the movie, where it's like, okay, how do we get rid of Benny? And like throughout the whole movie, he's like, oh man, I'm not gonna go in there, that's dark, it's creepy, I don't want to go in there. And then he's like, wait, I think I hear the dog down in the well. Let me climb down there and investigate. Like that was one of my biggest problems with
Yeah,
that movie. Like that was just
that's what I mean
dumb.
by rushed.
Yeah,
Like the sheriff and Benny dying felt a little rushed.
yeah,
Like, yeah, I understand that Benny was affected mentally, but like he still had enough of his faculties to go, let's get the fuck out.
yeah. But he loses those faculties where he's like, yeah, everything I've said about I don't want to go in the dark, fuck that. I'm climbing down into the well where this
It was
fucking
very out
thing
of character.
lives. Yeah.
It was very out of character, and that's like one of my big issues was it was out of character.
Mm-hmm.
Other than the weird way they killed off the sheriff.
Yeah.
Like that was just kind of like out of nowhere and weird. Like it was never explained that this was a part of the entity's powers to like animate fucking trees and shit. It was just shown to be, living organic life that was capable of locomotion.
Yeah.
Anyway, they go back inside, or at least Lavinia does. She
Nick
gets
Cage brings her back inside and is like, now go feed your mother. And I was like, oh no.
she gets fucking assaulted by
Mom.
Jack Risa thing.
Yeah.
The mom is named Teresa. The son is named Jack.
Yeah.
Anyway, gets attacked, and then Nick Cage shows up and just fucking blasts it.
Yeah. He has a moment of clarity. That's also one of my favorite. Like, he doesn't go crazy in that scene, but I there is something kind of like cathartic and funny when he's like, he kills both of them, and then he's like, they're not my family. And he just kind of casually walks out, and Ward and the sheriff are like, what the actual fuck?
Yeah, they're like, what?
But yeah,
then,
no, it's, yeah.
Then that's when Ward and Phillips goes to see Ezra.
Mm-hmm.
Find out he's already fucking dead.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Sheriff
they
gets
come
killed.
back. Sheriff gets on their way back. Sheriff gets killed. Ward tries to get Lavinia out, but she's fully lost to the madness.
Yeah.
Gets consumed.
That's the other thing too, is like, because they hint at, like, in some of her dialogue early on with like you said, she does Wiccan rituals and all that. At the very beginning of the movie, she is trying to do a thing where she's like, protect us from, or like, protect me from evil, protect me from these forces or whatever, and then she does another spell, or
From
like another,
Necronomicon, no less.
and she does another one where she's like, take me away from here, let me escape or whatever. And both of those things do technically happen, which is kind of like maybe a subtle way of being like, even though this is like a scientific, like, otherworldly thing, maybe there is a hint of paranormal to it, because in the end, nothing, the entity doesn't really hurt her ever. It doesn't really do anything other than like psychologically scar her, and then at the end, she does get like taken away to another place.
She just gets slurped up like, like you're drinking a really good milkshake, just.
Basically.
But yeah, that was some good shit. Like I really enjoyed that. And then at the end, Nick Cage goes back inside. He's also lost to the madness.
Mm-hmm.
Sits down on his couch and he sees his family there.
Yeah.
And it was a decent end.
Yeah.
Again, not perfect. No movie ever will be.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's like you said, it feels rushed, but at the same time, it's like I think it is kind of like the best way that they could have ended the story while not being like a direct adaptation of what Lovecraft wrote. And it does make me super excited to see the guy's Dunwich Horror movie and whatever the third one will be.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, final thoughts on Color Out of Space. I enjoyed it a lot. It definitely has problems. I'd consider it more of like a guilty pleasure movie than like an objectively, oh my god, this is an amazing experience. But it is definitely worth a watch. If you're a horror fan, you'll love it. If you're a Lovecraft fan, you'll love it. If you're not familiar with Lovecraft, then I think you definitely still should watch it, because I feel like with everything we've said about him being like kind of like dealing with like existential horror, this is kind of like one of the more like concrete like gateway stories that you could tell to get someone interested in his work, I feel like. So it's definitely a good starting point.
Yeah.